Hey folks, welcome to another live stream on Simplified Gardening, and today's topic is all about getting your garden ready for spring, so that's spring prep. And there's so much to be doing and sometimes the weather doesn't play ball. So before we go on, in the chat section at the top, as normal, you got your live and you have your top chat, and there's also a Q&A box there now. So if you click on that, only add questions in there, folks, okay? Because that'll just make my life much easier in finding those questions that we'll need to answer a little bit later on. And it also makes it easier for me to pull it out so that I can keep up with the chat and everything else as well. So just a few hellos to loads of you in here at the moment. So we've got, let me just scroll up. So we've got Amelia, Ali, Will It Grow, Michael, Steve, Danny, Jean, Rob, Ali, Adam, Francis, Stuart, so many of you in. Blues in, Alan, guys, there's just so many of you in. Jay's back in, glad to see you, Jay. Coastal Crocus, Kang Tani, Steve is in, Steve Digwell, Kerry's in. Right, there's so many of you in, guys. Now, if I'm looking over there, it's just because I'm actually looking at this screen here, okay? Just so you get an idea. And I am having a drink. And the reason for that is I've had a really busy week. I got off work at 9 o'clock this morning, so I've worked all weekend. And of course, this weekend, Tina's away and the kids are here. They're up in their rooms at the moment. But, so I've been running around all day with those, getting stuff sorted. So it's been a bit of a busy week. So I'm having a drink. Right, so let's get into some of the topics that we're going to talk about today, and that is about the garden prep. Now, what a lot of people do is they stay out of the garden at this time of year, and it's the wrong thing to do. Now is the time to go and get that prep done so that you're not rushing at one of the busiest times in the year, which is sowing all the seeds and planting out and everything else. Because the garden goes through phases. The first 3 months, that's when you really want to be prepping it and getting all of those jobs that you've been putting off done. Now, we're going to be talking about some of those jobs as we go on today and what you can be doing. But the important thing here is to realize, although it's cold and everything else, there's still things you can be doing at this time of year. And if you do this now, what it's going to do is make your life easier later, and it's going to save you a huge amount of time. You'll have a better garden for it. There's just for the few hours you put in now, it's going to make your life so much easier as time goes on in this growing season. So the first thing that we could be looking at doing is obviously clearing that garden. So getting up there, removing all the dead foliage and things off the beds, pulling out any plants that are starting to die back. I mean, we've had some crazy weather. We went from really, really cold to really warm to snow back to freezing temperatures again, and the ground's rock hard again. You just can't write it. And we've had all that rain in between as well. I mean, I still haven't been able to get to the garden. I could have filmed today, but like I said, I've been running around with the kids, and it'll be pretty much the same tomorrow. But yeah, so get the top of that garden cleared off, and this is going to allow you then to know exactly what you're up to, as far as prepping beds and things like that. So if you haven't already, start now by adding some questions that you want answered in that question box that's at the top of the chat, and we can go through some of those. And I want you to also put in the chat about what you've been doing in your gardens this week. Have you been clearing it out and things like that? Now, some of the things that that this is good for is it's going to allow you to check for things like pests and disease. You wouldn't think of this time of year as being so cold, but now is the perfect time when you're clearing, to go and find those slug eggs that are hiding in along the sides of wooden beds or underneath pots and things like that. Because if you can remove them before they hatch, yes, 9/10 of the battle, it'll really make a big difference for you. So it'll allow you to get in there and look for those pests and disease and eradicate it now while they're dormant. And that will you'll notice a massive change in your garden over the year if you do that. A lot of people don't, because they stay out of the garden at this time of year because it's so cold. So let's have a little look through the chat before we go on onto that. So Steve Soames is asking, I'm new to this, but I've started a worm farm and trying to make worm tea. Steve, first thing you need to worry about now this time of year is keeping those worms warm, okay? So I don't know where your farm is, but at the moment that, the soils are freezing, they're literally getting like blocks of ice. So, if you can keep them warm, wrap that worm farm up, polystyrene or something like that, or bring it indoors into a garage and wrap it up. Anything that you can do to save those worms. And the warmer they are, the better they're going to feed and breed and obviously produce worm castings. And worm tea is a fantastic way of inoculating your soil with all those microbial microbes, bacteria, fungi, protozoas, and all of those sort of things. So yeah, it's good, just keep them warm at this time of year. And cut the feed down as well, because what you don't want is food that's going to decay where they're not eating it, because that'll poison the soil, and you'll find your worms are climbing up the sides trying to get out of the worm farm. So hiya Pam. Pam's here, and she's what are you doing to prep? Well, the first thing, we'll talk about some of the things as we go on through the live, Pam, but the first thing that I'm going to be doing, like I said, is clearing off. I've got loads of things that I need to be doing. Now, I've already been up and I've already pruned back most of my fruit trees, not all, okay? And this is a perfect time to be pruning fruit trees in order to get them for their growth, okay? Not so good if you want them to fruit even more, because you should have done that back in the autumn, okay? But now's a good time if you've got a young fruit tree and you want it, you want it to grow structure and to put most of its growth into new foliage, then now's the perfect time to prune those fruit. And it's the same thing with soft fruits as well, okay? Get up there, get all of those sort of things done. But I've done a lot of them. I've still got some left to do, but it's a perfect time now for renewing paths. I've got those 4 huge beds that I've got to fill, and there will be a video coming up on that very shortly. And those beds are going to be used for some specific veg, so each of them will be filled differently, and you'll see that in the video when I do get around to being able to get up there and film, due to the weather we've had here. But a lot of the garden is already clear. Because I'm no dig, I don't tend to suffer with huge amounts of weed. Don't get me wrong, there's still weeds on my plot, and along the one polytunnel in front, the one IBC in front of the shed, I sowed a green manure that had ryegrass in it, so that's all been knocked back a little bit now by this really cold spell that we're having. Eventually I'll have to clean that off, because I'm going to be putting a brassica cage there. And incidentally, this next couple of months is the perfect time in order to be doing all of these DIY jobs. Danny, who's in the chat, I'll be going over his very shortly, probably early Feb, something like that, middle of Feb, in order to reskin a polytunnel. So these few months, these are when you get all of that DIY stuff done. And I'm in the middle of the cold frames in the Wellbeing Garden. They're still not finished, so I got to do that. But to do that, I want to incorporate them into the new walls of the shed, the side walls of the shed. So I've got to strip that out. So that's like not a small job. So I'm going to leave that until after all the other prep work is done. Obviously, I've been getting things out, like my potatoes are out shitting now, and they finally came from JBA for the seed that I'm actually purchasing this year. There's what I'm actually doing at the moment as well is I'll be pulling out compost now out of my bays. I'll be creating a pile, because this year, if you remember, to the potato video last year, I did that trial with all of the peat-free composts. I'm doing that again because I had no potatoes, and for the first time in 12 years I've had to buy potatoes this year. So that ain't ever happening again. So I'm going straight back to my own compost, but I'm going to be mixing that with a few other ingredients. And a few people have actually asked me about this, whether or not it will, the ingredients I'm going to be using, would they include like perlite and vermiculite? They won't, because if you look at some of the giant potato videos I've done, I had this idea that the lighter the mix, the better the potatoes would grow, because there's less resistance on them, so they were able to grow faster. And when I harvested those, the potatoes were very poor, and I put that down to the mix. So there won't be anything like perlite or anything like that. There will be some cocoa coir going in there. In fact, I've got quite a lot of cocoa coir. I think I've got about 120 kilo dry blocks. So they're 5 kilo blocks. They make hundreds of kilos of coir when it's when it's had the water absorbed, and I got about 120 kilos of these things. So there's a lot of coir there, and I'm going to be mixing that probably 50-50ish with my own compost, and that is what I'm going to be using to grow this year's potatoes. And we're going to see whether or not they do well. Now, we know the potatoes grow well in my compost, because if you look back at the I grew 71 pound of potatoes by accident video, well, you just saw how well that was. So we know the compost is good, and I do spend a lot of time making the compost. So yeah, there's loads going on in the garden. The vines are all been pruned back. I didn't get around to wrapping my bananas this year, so they've literally died right back to the ground, or they've sort of flopped over all mushy. But with Musa Bijou, they will resprout from the comb. As long as that comb don't die, they will resprout from that, and we should be okay, because they're quite a hardy banana, so they should be fine. The old tunnel, I've got a lot of work to do. I've got the grapes to prune in there. There's leaves all over the floor in there, and that's before I do any sowing, any real sowing, I've just pulled out some bits out of there that I need, and I'll get in there. But the new big tunnel is pretty much done. It's ready to go. Right, let's have a look at what else we've got here. So Danny, I've transplanted all my fruit bushes from the grapevine plot to the fig olive plot. Some started to bud. Will that affect my crop this year? Yes, Danny, it'll affect your crop. So basically, I'm going to be doing a similar thing now. For those of you who know, in my old tunnel, I've got quite a large peach tree and an apricot tree, and both of those trees are going to need to come out of there, because I've been cutting them, but they're pushing further and further against the top of the tunnel. And I put them in there initially because they need the warmth, to get going. But I'm running out of time now, because they're going to start budding very soon, and I've got about 2 tons of sand sat where they need to go. So I've got to get up there, got to get that done. But every time you move a fruit bush, essentially you're cutting probably more than 50% of the root ball away, all right, because they spread those right out. And then when you cut those roots, that plant has to put its energy back into repairing those roots and putting out new feeder roots so that it can feed. You will still get fruit this year, but you probably only get about a third of what you would normally get off them. So just bear that in mind. I've already assigned myself to getting no fruit at all on the peach and apricot this year, because I'm moving them, number one, outside, and obviously they're big trees, so they're going to, have quite a lot of their root mass removed. Okay, but it's the same with any fruit tree or bush that you move. Okay, is it best to amend the soil in the spring or fall? Okay, Jordan. Right, so one of the things that we were going to be talking about in a moment was preparing beds. That's one of the things you're going to do this time of year. You're going to prepare your beds, and that's what I was saying about earlier on, cleaning off those beds and getting them ready. And one of those things for that is a soil test. Now, 2 options you have. You can send it to a lab, which is about £20, and what you would do for that, I got a really big article. I don't know if Danny can jump to the website, just put soil test in the search and pull up the link and post that. But it's a big article on it, and essentially what you're doing with these soil tests is you're taking little bits of soil from around your garden, putting them into a bag, you're sending them off, and then they send you this huge sheet of all of the makeup of your soil and what it's lacking and what you have to do. So, and it'll include things like, you know, your boron and all of this sort of stuff, okay, as well as your NPKs and stuff. So that's a really good one. You should do that every 3 years so that you know where you are. And then in between those 3 years, you can get these little home test kits from Amazon, and they're ideal. They'll tell you your NP and K and your pH, okay, so they're perfect for that. And what you'll need to do is test your soil so that you can amend it. Now, if your pH is up and you're going to be growing brassicas, perfect, you know, it's not a problem. But if it's acidic and you want to grow brassicas in there, well, you need to bring that up. So you can add lime, which will help bring that up. Or if you deciding that you're growing blueberries, well, they like acidic soil, so you need to bring it down. Now, you could use ericaceous, but again, that's costing money. So what you could do at that point is add sulfur. Now, going to back to your question of whether it's better in the spring or fall, it's always better in the spring. If you amend them in the fall, what happens is all of the bad weather that we have in the winter washes those nutrients out of the soil. So you've amended a bed thinking it's right and you're going, and then you're going to get a poor crop because the winter has actually hammered the soil and taken all them nutrients out. Okay, the only way to protect those nutrients after you've amended in the autumn is by sowing a green manure, something like a legume, or you know, sort of field beans or vetch or something like that, that will take those nutrients and lock them in their root systems. Now, if you've ever grown a vetch or a legume before, like a field bean, on the root system you'll see these little nodules, and basically what that is nitrogen, but they also fix other nutrition as well, and there's so many different green manures that will do this. There are green manures that will have you know, like a killing effect across your ground, a sterilization effect for all pathogens and stuff like that. They're like the mustards and things, but the legumes, they're actually harvesting those nutrients and they're holding them in their roots. And then when you terminate that crop, those roots start to rot back into the ground and release those nutrients back into the ground at the perfect time. That is the only time I would suggest that you amend a bed in the autumn. Otherwise, if you're not going to grow the green manure, that a legume green manure that would do that, a harvesting one, then I would suggest you amend your beds in the early spring, which would be a perfect time, and give it about 6 weeks before you want to plant into it, and that'll give it time to settle out and see where you are. Now, once you've amended your bed, you want to do another test afterwards and see whether or not you're in the ballpark. But there is one thing that will really help with your beds, and that's compost. Because if you're adding compost to your beds on a regular basis, what's happening is you're adding the microbiology, and it's the microbiology that sort out all of this nutrition. But they'll bring up all the macro and micronutrients. They'll bring in everything that you need into that bed, providing you're doing it right and it's quality compost and it's alive. Okay. So JB, hey Tony, have you ever tried super soil? No, I haven't, mate. I think I've got asked this now for the last 5 or 6 episodes, and I know Steve Digwell is using it, and I know Steve from Greenside Up is going to be using it now as well, isn't he? So, but I haven't used it myself. To me, this super soil is probably, I can't say what it is because I haven't had it, but to me it sounds like a condensed version of the microbes that are in compost. So if I'm creating quality compost, why am I paying for something to add there? Because here's the issue. If your soil is lacking in the organic matter to have good quality microbes in the first place, what you're doing with these sort of products is you're paying for them. Great, it's adding these microbes to your soil, but then there's nothing in your soil for those microbes to feed on and they die. So to me, you're better off putting the effort into making quality compost and bringing the microbial life in that way. I'm not bagging super soil at all, so don't get me that. Like I said, I've never used it. I can't have an opinion on it. This is just my opinion based on what I see based around compost and microbes and things like that. Okay. So this one's saying, "Hi Tony, thank you for all the tips. I have had 6 fruit trees in pots since last April, which are headed for my allotment. When would you say is the best time to plant them?" You can get them in now. They're going to be dormant, and basically what you want is them in the ground. So if it's, as long as the ground's not frozen like it is at the moment, as soon as it starts to frost, then you can get them in. You want them in that ground so that as soon as those sugars start to rise and they are going to start growing, they can push out the root system. When you plant your fruit trees, dig a square hole, not a round one, okay? This is where a lot of people go wrong. They get lazy when they dig in the hole, go, oh, that's about the right size, and it's usually rounded because that's the way the spades are or whatever. Dig a square hole. What happens is those roots will push out to a side wall and they will bend along a wall and then hit a corner. And when they hit that corner, they push through into the outside soil rather than going round and round in circles. Okay, so this is what you'll see if you just put a potted tree into a hole, a round hole, and you dig it up 10 years later, most of the roots have choked themselves out and they start rotting because they got no place to go because they're just going round and round in circles, and eventually they're climbing all over each other, strangling each other. So create a square hole, it'll push those roots out. Matty, hi Tony. Where is the best and cheapest place to buy BT from? Bacillus thurensis, thuringiensis, I get from Amazon, and I bought a really big pot. Now this stuff isn't cheap, but it is brilliant stuff. Um, I mean, I've had mine for probably 3 years, and it had like a 5 year shelf life on it. So, but I would still use it even after the 3 years, as long as it's keeping things away and doing its job. Then I'm happy. But yeah, I get it from Amazon, so that's where you can probably get it, like most things. You know, I tend to use Amazon a lot, and unless there's something local I can go and get, only because like I'm busy here making things for you guys, and it's difficult. I'm blogging, I'm podcasting, I'm doing this and everything else, and I don't have time to be traveling like 2 hours to somewhere that they'll have something. It's easier for Amazon to just bring it to me, and I know that's crap, but it's just the way it is. Okay, Major Dog, hello, I have Sclerotina fungus on a couple of beds last year. What do you suggest to deal with it? It destroyed my carrots above and below ground, and it finished my beans too, Carl. Right, Carl, there's a product, again, it's not cheap, called SB Plant Invigorator. And this stuff is fantastic for dealing things with fungal infections, powdery mildews, and it can even help against things like white fly and aphids and things like that, right? So, but what it's basically a liquid soap, but it's got a load of other stuff in it as well. It's totally organic, all right. But it's not cheap. It's quite expensive. But you're only using 1 ml per liter of water, so you can buy like a 500 ml bottle or something that's just going to last you forever. I'm still using the same bottle years later. So, but it is really good stuff. Impatient gardener, planning my garden. What's the best way to attract brachynoid wasps or other parasitic wasps? So provide the things that they want. Firstly, you're going to be looking at habitat as far as places for them to build nests and stuff. Okay, most of those type of wasps are solitary anyway, but so you can get these boxes that'll have lots of little holes in and be perfect for those. If you can, let part of your garden go over to stingy nettles or grow them in pots because they use these as feeding bays, because that's where a lot of other insects tend to congregate to lay their eggs and things like that, and and have a good water source, and they'll come because they're looking for a food source. So if you've got a food source for them, hence with the stingy nettles and things like that, and yes, the stingies will bring in the good beneficial insects, but it'll also bring in the wasps and parasitic wasps, things like that. Okay. Right. Is this Tabitha? Is it? Sorry. Been trying to eradicate horsetail in my lawn for the last 2 years using weed killer, then reseeding. Any hints on what would help? Right. This plant has been around since the dinosaurs, and the reason being is it sends these really fine roots down meters and meters and meters into the soil. Okay, it is nigh on impossible to get rid of. You can get rid of it, right? But it's a long, long old job, and you have to literally pull it or poison it. I wouldn't suggest poisoning it because you're poisoning your soil and everything else around it, right? But you have to maintain it really quick. Cutting it doesn't do anything. What you have to do when it pokes its head through, you have to dig down, take as much of the root as possible, and you have to do that within like hours of it coming up, because essentially what you're doing is trying to starve the plant of energy. And so what you're doing by doing that is removing the top growth, which takes the energy from the sun by photosynthesizing and feeding the root system. If you can stay on top of that, then you're golden. The problem is when people don't stay on top of it, and then they allow some to come up for a few days, and then that feeds the root system, so you're back to square one. Another option would be to totally take the top off the lawn and cover that lawn completely for about a year or two until you starve that root system. Now, this stuff will come up through concrete, okay, so you still need to be on top of it. It's no good just putting down like a fabric weed membrane. It'll just come through it. You need to be covering it in plastic or something like that and staying on top of it, checking it every week. Anything has come through, take it off, put the plastic back down. It's unfortunately, it's not a great plant to be dealing with. And touch wood, I've not had to deal with it in this place. We did have a little bit in my last place, but here, touch wood, so far I haven't had to deal with it. Steve, how do I tune blackcurrant bushes? Right, these are a bit different to most fruit where you're looking for crossing branches and things like that. You're still doing that, Steve. But with blackcurrant, you want to prune back to the literally down to the ground more or less as you can. Okay, so you take away a third of the plant at any one time, no more. All right, and what you're doing is you're looking for the oldest parts of the plant and you're taking them right back, and where you cut them back it will send out new shoots. And this is why you only do a third, so that basically you're replacing the whole plant every 3 years. And you can, if you find that they're getting out of hand, you can cut them back to about half the length as well, or the what's left. Okay, but you have to regenerate these sort of bushes. Okay, so 1/3 of the plant, cut it right back down, but don't just take like a third out chunk out of it. Just go and pick selected branches, all the oldest ones, cut them out, leave the second and third year branches there, and then they'll throw out a new lot, and then next year you'll do the same thing. They'll throw out a new lot, and the year after you do the same thing. So every 3 years you're completely renewing the plant. It's the same thing with black currant, red currant, and the same thing with things like honeyberries. Same thing with all of those sort of fruit bushes. Okay, don't go doing it with your blueberries though, because they won't like it. Let's have a look what else we got here. When would you apply super soil? Probably about 6 weeks before you want to plant, I'm assuming, Alan. Give it time to get established. But I mean, what you have to understand again is they need nutrition to survive. So if there is any microbial life in the super soil, I don't know. Like I said, I haven't got any of it to look at what's in it, and I haven't really been inclined to have a look, to be honest with you. But yeah, you can basically go and 6 weeks before, that should be more than enough time, but just make sure there's enough enough food in that soil for them to feed until you get plants and things like that going in there. Make sure there's plenty of compost and stuff that's still needing to that has carbon in it, because carbon is the food for microbes. Okay, a lot of people are not aware of why they think it's the nitrogen and things like that. It's the carbon that's actually the food source. Okay, so so make sure it's got plenty of carbon, that it's not completely finished compost. Get some of that on the ground, you'll be fine with it. J for Simone Nyman. Can't get in Q&A. I heard that covering the containers with cardboard protects them. Right. What containers is that, Simone? If you put it down, Jay, if you can look out for her message again and throw it back in. I'm not sure what containers she's on about. Michael, 2x4, 2x2 square, okay, for one bare root fruit tree, and would you feed when planting or wait? Okay, Michael, depends on how big your root ball is. If it's a bare root, then yeah, 2x2 is no problem at all. That's fine. It doesn't, you don't even probably need that. What you need is just enough that the root ball has, the roots that are on there have room to spread out. What you don't want to be doing is clamming them all in a ball like that. You want a big enough thing so you can spread those roots out so that they can push out straight away. And I would put just a small amount of compost, I mean a small amount, and mix that within the soil that was excavated from the hole. I wouldn't just stick it in. And the reason for this is it'll just provide a little bit of nutrition. But what you don't want to do with fruit trees is put loads of compost in with them, because what you're doing is basically giving them a larder. Why would they need to push their root systems out? So they pull the roots in. You want them root systems to get out. Number one, they can feed, they can select water, they're better with that. It'll dry the roots down as well, so they anchor themselves. Yeah, so when you're planting trees, you need to be quite sort of harsh with them. Don't overfeed them. Okay, you want to be quite harsh. And then for the next sort of 6-8 months, you want to be watering that tree regular. Make sure it doesn't dry out. Okay, so Matty, I'm thinking about growing a green manure over the next winter. I have very sandy soil. Which type would you suggest, and when would I cut and drop it? No dig. Okay, Matty. So it really depends on what you want the green manure for. Okay, there's lots of different things. So if you just want it in order to sort of clean and sterilize the soil, you're going to be looking at mustards and things like that, and you would typically plant them sort of later on in the season. This would be around about July, August time, and they would grow through until the first frost, and then they would die. Okay, but what they've done in the meantime is they cleared off all the pathogens and stuff out of your soil. If you want it to go through winter, there are various types. Like my favorites at the moment are hairy vetch, field beans, and ryegrass, and I have probably around about 30 kilos of each of them up in the shed at the moment. They they're fantastic for basically bringing nitrogen back into the soil. And as you know, nitrogen is one of the harder nutrients to replace organically. Okay, it's an expensive nutrient, and so if we can do that with a green manure, it's perfect. But essentially, guys, if you're not growing in your garden, right? So think about what Mother Nature's doing, right? If there's a bare piece of ground, she grows weeds all over it. And the reason for that is it helps protect that soil and the microbial life and everything else. It's giving the microbial life food. It's protecting the soil surface from erosion and compaction. Yeah. So essentially, you want to do the same thing. If you've got a bed that's empty in your garden, okay, for any length of time, you want to, if possible, sow a green manure in it if it can come. Now, there are quicker cropping ones through the summer. Like I said, you can grow a mustard or something like that, and then towards the end of the year you can sow. The actual bit of ground that I'm gonna turn over to brassicas this year, that was beside the IBC that I was talking about earlier on. Well, I didn't grow in it last year, and the year before I had potatoes in containers sat on top of it because the ground was quite poor. It's one of the parts of the ground of the garden that I haven't actually worked very well. But this year, a green manure was sown into it before winter. It's got absolutely hammered now with this cold thing. But eventually, I'll clean that off. I'll chop and drop it. Leave the root system in. I'll just build the brassica cage around it, and we'll go from there. We'll just start getting some compost straight on top of that. But yeah, if you can, just keep green manure going if you're not growing anything in particular. What part of plant feed APK do I need to look for to have more fruit and veg? So NPK, and if you're looking for the fruit and veg, it depends what it is. If it's veg and it's leafy greens, you want nitrogen, and if it's root veg, you're looking at phosphorus and potassium, and fruit really needs potassium. So but I mean phosphorus. To be honest with you tailor your feed dependent on the actual crop that you're growing. So if you're growing like kale and cabbage and things like that, well, they're a leafy green, okay? So you want something like 25 nitrogen and maybe just like 8 and 10 in the nitrogen in the potassium and phosphorus. You don't need a lot of those for those sort of crops. And then when you're looking at fruit and veg, it's the reverse. But when you're first planting these plants, so if you take into consideration, because it's not like a one size fits all with feed, and this is where people get mistaken. So when you first plant your plant, it's a small little seedling. That's going to need tons of nitrogen to put out that growth that it needs. But then when it starts establishing and becoming mature, and usually we see this from when they start to flower, if it's fruit, or when they start, finish pushing out most of the foliage, then you want to change over to the potassium and the phosphorus feed. So initially you would feed a high nitrogen and then swap over, and you would do this with things like chilies, tomatoes, cucumbers, all of those things. Feed them the nitrogen to get the plant established, and then as soon as they start flowering, swap over then to the potassium and the phosphorus. Okay, for Dyke question, cannot type visually impaired. Wednesday is the best time to start. Oh, sorry. When is the best time to start using nematodes on an empty blank border? Okay, Di. So nematodes are a great thing, all right, but they need warmish temperatures. So you need to be around about 13 to 15 degrees, the soil temperature, okay? So that's not the air temperature, but the soil temperature. So once the soil feels warmish to touch, then you can start applying the nematodes. There's no point applying them before because they'll just die. So think about that soil. If you can touch that soil and it's not feeling really, really cold, it's probably warm enough. But if you're touching anything, oh, I don't want my hands in it, it's too cold, then it's not going to be warm enough for you, all right? But wait, it's all about your location, because I could say, like here, I could probably do it in a few weeks if we didn't keep having this cold weather, and, it would be fine. But then your place may not be able to do it until May. So it's about getting your hand in the soil. And if you can put your hand in that soil and keep it in it comfortably, then you'll be all right. Right, Terry Hall, sorry. I have a gopher thinking of growing in nursery pots in raised beds so I don't have to lay down wire mesh. Thoughts? Yeah, I'm really lucky I don't have to deal with gophers. If you've got raised beds, what's the problem with meshing the bottom of them? Just the actual bottom of the bed. Is this because, I mean, if you're going to grow no dig, you're probably not going to end up digging down there ever again anyway. Granted, you would have to empty the bed in order to do that, but it's one way of dealing with it. My concern about pots is the fact that you would continually be watering, and it's already hard. And when you're watering a bed, the plants will pull water in from other areas of the garden bed by the wicking process. But when they're in a nursery pot, they can't do that because a plastic pot is just going to stop that wicking process. So that's my only concern, and it's very easy for a pot to dry out, even if it's buried. I would probably go to the effort of actually meshing the bottom of the beds if that was of a concern to you. Right, so Jay from Simone, I heard the covering soil topped with manure with plain cardboard would protect the soil through the winter. Yeah. And look, so when basically what you want to do when you're protecting the soil in winter, okay, is stopping that onslaught of rain, just hammering it and washing out those nutrients, okay, because it causes compaction, it takes soil away, so you get erosion, and then on top of that, you're losing all your nutrition as well, okay, so yeah, cardboard will help. Manure on top will help. Plastic sheeting will help. I don't recommend that because soil likes to breathe, but it would help. But green manures will help. Anything. If you're not going to grow even a cover crop or something like that, then mulch that garden, put some compost on it. Yeah, that's going to protect it because that compost will take a hammering, and compost won't compress like soil will because soil has got all these little aggregates that they bind together, okay, and when they start binding, that's when you get a compaction. You see that a lot, especially with clay soils. All right. Compost's a fantastic way of protecting the soil. Again, you've got to be able to make your own for that because purchasing it would be an expensive hobby. Or even worst case scenario, just cover it over with wood chip and then pull that out of the way back in spring. That's going to protect it as well. Um, Amelia. No, I didn't hurt myself, Amelia. So that this was a short video I put out the other day, Amelia. And a lot of you will have seen that video, probably going back year before last now, where Tony from Little Farmer's Farm came down to help me take down some of the sheds. Now, where the polytunnels are and the well-being garden, there was 7 or 8 sheds, 20 foot long by about 10 foot wide each, and they were all connected together. They were built by the last gardener, is a lovely gentleman called Keith, who has sadly passed away a few years ago now. And over the years that I've been at this garden, I've taken on more and more of the land that he had, and now I have it all. But of course, with that came 40 years of taking down sheds and I must have done 50 or 60 trips to the recycle centre with all the rubbish that was inside them. But this one was the roof. I'd taken all these, he sort of like nailed all these glass windows in his walls because he was using it as a greenhouse, and it wasn't very safe at all. So what I'd done was I'd cut off all of the steel sheeting on the one side, and we had it propped on a pivot on the inside. So when I knocked out this wooden stake that was leaned up against it, it pivoted on the one post on the inside. Instead of collapsing inwards, it collapsed outwards. And I hadn't long built the tunnel. Literally, it must have been weeks. And it was coming down, and basically the shed knocked me into the doorway of the tunnel. I was pushing it like that not to hit the tunnel, and it missed the tunnel by about that much. Fortunately, the tunnel doors were open. I ended up inside the tunnel doors on my back with this shed right across my lap. So I was pinned there. Fortunately, as you can hear me laughing in there, I wasn't hurt. There wasn't a lot of weight there. It was just weird the way it came down, and I thought at the time, they'd taken out that central post that we put in to hold it up while we were taking down this other half, because what we did was it was like 20 odd foot long. We folded one half down like that, and then I went to knock out this post, but I forgot I put a post in this middle here. So instead of it just folding down like it should have, it went straight on top of me. But no, I wasn't hurt, Amelia, but thank you for that anyway. So, Danny, do you think the little and often approach in the garden is best? So you hear this all the time, and it's been a running joke with me and Danny, guys. Little and often. And I suppose if you've watched enough YouTube channels, you will have heard this a lot, especially on a certain channel. Won't say who it was. Look, if you've got an allotment and you are feeding your family out of that allotment or garden or whatever it is, okay, like anything else in life that's worth doing, it takes time, effort, and work. All right, you can't bypass it. Now, there are sometimes easier ways of doing things, but the work still needs to be done. And that's what all this is about now, about the garden prep. If we don't do this prep now, we end up with a jungle full of weeds later. By doing the prep now, okay, we don't. So little and often depends on how much it is. It's because my little and often is like maybe 5 or 6 or 7 hours in a day when I'm off. And I might do that, 4 days a week. And then on the days I'm in work, I'm up there for a few hours in the evening, right? It's a lot of time. So, you know, I don't think you can potentially run, and I think anybody who has a successful garden will say the same. Okay, you can't get a garden that is productive and feeds your family, and you don't have any issues, and it looks beautiful and everything else without putting that effort in. And to put that effort in, you have to be there. I don't think little should be in anybody's vocabulary when you're in a garden situation. And if you don't want to do that, guys, guess what? You're in the wrong place, because yes, it's a pastime for us all, but I love being there anyways, and I love work. And it's funny because, do you know what? I'll come from the garden and I can be up there all day long working, bending, doing this, that, and the other, shoveling, and I don't feel nothing. I just get some ear pods in and I'll do what I'm doing. I'll come home and sit down and have a cup of tea, and I can't move after it. But when I'm up there, it's to me, it's just like my medicine. So little and often doesn't. Maybe the often does, but the little part just doesn't wash with me. But that's just a personal opinion. But it's been a running joke with me and Danny for quite some time. Okay, would you grow beans with all of those greens at the same time, companion planting? Probably not. And here's my reason for it. The issue you got with these sort of green manures is they are going to be pulling nutrition out of the soil and storing it in roots, and your beans are going to need that as well. And greens, yes, they're a legume and they'll do the same thing. But why, when you've prepped the ground, okay, would you want anything competing with your beans? Because they are hungry plants. Okay, what I would personally do is mulch the bed and just leave the beans have that nutrition, because after all, we're growing them for them to produce food. Then you want to put a green manure in there, and until you terminate that green manure, it's actually feeding. So it's pulling that nutrition out of the ground. Well, that's nutrition that the beans could have potentially used to make better or a larger crop, okay? And it's not until you terminate it and those roots rot does that nutrition get put back into the ground, which is probably after the beans are gone. So potentially I wouldn't grow anything with them. You could put something like a gourd or summer squash or something sprawling through them, a little bit like you would with Three Sisters. But again, not many people can make Three Sisters work either. So it swings and roundabouts. It's all very nice with, thinking about these things, but a lot of people think, right, okay, I'm going to sow my corn, sow my beans, sow my squash, and then I got to plant them all out and everything's going to be hunky-dory. The problem is the beans grow 5 times faster than the corn does, so there's no support for them. So you've got to really plan it well. The corn has got to be sown weeks and weeks and weeks before anything else. Then, rather than sowing the beans in cups and planting them out later, you need to just put a bean seed at the foot of the corn after it's a couple of feet high, so that it has plenty of time for that corn to get growing before that bean gets up there. And then you've got to put the squash in even later, so that the squash don't swamp the beans before they've grown. So although it's the three sisters is a nice method and companion planting is a nice method, you really need to think about what you're actually doing and what the plant needs and how fast they grow. A lot of people don't take those sort of things into consideration, and that's why the three sisters won't work for them. Okay, but as far as your question goes, Ali, I would just mulch around the beans and let them have the nutrition in the soil. Michael, double digging a new garden, 6 inches of loamy topsoil above 6 inches of filled soil with alluvium below. Is mixing the top two layers together a bad idea? Yes, don't mix them. I think the best, right, if it's a new build, you're not going to have a lot of topsoil. So unless you can bring topsoil in, you're going to have no option. You're going to have to go through it, because typically with new builds, all of the crap that they've had out of the building process tends to get buried in back gardens and covered over with a lawn, okay? Because it's cheaper for them to do that than haul it away. So it depends on what you want from your garden. But either way, you are going to be set back for a couple of years by doing that, okay? So you could dig right through it, all right, and remove all the big rocks and things like that, and any crap that's been buried, and mix the soils. But then you would need to be putting in tons and tons and tons of compost over the top of that over the next few years in order to bring all the microbes and worms back. And you will probably see a decline in your crops for a couple of years as well. If you can avoid digging it, if you've got 6 inches, you can build that soil level with things like compost, okay? And if you go and put like 4 inches of compost on top of that, well, you've got 10 inches. Well, carrots will grow down into the soils below. There's not many root veg are going to need more than 12. Many veg are going to need more than 12 inches anyway, apart from your roots, and they will push down into the soil levels below. But obviously, then you're going to have to struggle a little bit to get them out. But look, it is what it is. The problem is, in an ideal world, we wouldn't do these things. But in an ideal world, I'd never dig. But sometimes you just have to. I'm not adverse to digging, and if I need to, like for argument's sake, if I had a ton of bindweed, I would dig it out. Because why am I battling this for years? Just having to be, I dig most of it out, get rid of most of it to start with, then I'd start mulching and everything else, and then I would be doing the smothering thing. So I'm not adverse to digging, because I know how to rebuild soil afterwards. And that's the key here, Michael. If you know how to rebuild your soil afterwards, then it's not a problem. Pam, what's your favourite section of your first book? It has to be all the microbiology that's in the first book. So this is the book, guys, Composting Masterclass. And basically, when I wrote it, the whole book is based around composting, but with the theme about all of the microbiology and the life that's under our feet, because without it, none of us would be here. And people don't give that a second thought. It's what makes this world work. Okay. And when you consider all of the protozoas, the fungal life, the bacteria, the microbes, all of this stuff working together, feeding on each other, defecating in the soil, is why we have topsoil in the first place. And that's the section. I think it was chapter 3, if I remember right. But that's the section that I really enjoyed writing, and it's the one part of the book that I think will really make people, once you understand that and understand what's happening below, the composting process is really quite an easy process, because right, okay, I've got microbiology in my compost because it's heating up. They are now breeding, so we go into the thermophilic layers and stuff like that, right? Depending on the temperatures that we're getting. So, we can understand what's happening with the life in the soil and how long the compost is going to work due to the heat. Whereas before, people go, oh, my compost is heating up. That must be because I put nitrogen, grass clippings in it. Well, no, it's not because of that. It's because of the microbial life are multiplying. And that section is why I wanted to get all of that in so that people understand what the process is. And when you understand that, and I tell you something, it's quite a fascinating thing when you really get into it. But when you understand that process, it's like composting. It's like that light bulb moment clicks in, and you really understand that process, and you can just make compost like that. And when something goes wrong, you go, look, that's because of this. I need to do this, and you do it. It's like driving, guys. I mean, how many of you drive? You don't think about changing gear, checking your mirrors, and this, that, and the other. Now, when you were learning, you were like this all the time, going, right, I got to do this. But now it's just like second nature. It's done subconsciously, most of it, and that's how I want people to get with composting. And when we can do that, and we can do that en masse, then we are in control of our own gardens. Okay, so let's pull up, let's go back there and pull up this one. So this one's from Jay. From Day, can I go ahead and plant plants in my border before starting the nematodes when the soil is warmed up and put them in at the same time? Yeah. So with nematodes, you want to be putting nematodes on your garden throughout the season about every 6 weeks. Okay. Now, nematodes are naturally in your soil anyway. Okay, and there's 4 different classes of nematodes, and this is where people get worried when you tell them you're going to put nematodes on. They may have had experience before, or they've been told that the plant died and it was caused by nematodes, right? And yeah, that is the case. But not all nematodes are bad. It's just like anything else. I mean, invariably, most people are good, but we've got some bad eggs as well, And it's the same thing with nematodes. It's the same thing with everything, right? So but these are good nematodes, and they can be applied every 6 weeks for controlling predators, your slugs and things like that. All right, and you can get nematodes for all sorts of things. But yeah, so plant your garden out when that soil is warm enough. Water it all over. Just water the soil all around your plants, and you'll be done. And then but you do. It's not a one-time application. All right. So if you're struggling, go to my channel. Type in comfrey. No, sorry. How to make your own nematodes. And put Simplify Garden at the end just to make sure, and it'll pull up a video where I show you how to make your own nematodes. But essentially, you're just collecting loads of slugs, putting them on a lettuce raft that's floating in a bucket of water, a couple of inches of water. There'll be a couple of slugs in there infected that will then infect all the others before they finish eating the lettuce raft and then die in that soup. And then you use that soup, liquid it down. Try that again. Dilute it down, and then spray that out. That's a much cheaper way of doing it, especially if you've got a large garden, because nematodes are not cheap, guys. All right, but they are fantastic. Okay, I grew summer raspberries in pots last year, but it was a nightmare with watering it. Any tips? Yeah, get them in the ground. Look, raspberries can get big plants, and think about what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to provide you with a shed load of fruit, yeah, and that fruit takes a lot of water. The fruit itself is about 90% water when you consider it, yeah, and to produce that, the plant is probably using 5 times that. So, it's going to swallow the water. And then in the pot, you've got evaporation and all of this stuff going on as well. So get them in the ground if you can. Now, if you're worried that they're going to spread, you can dig yourself a nice deep trench and line that out with, some tin sheeting or something like that. And then, plant the plants back in and you're away, and that'll stop them spreading, so they only stay in that one line. Essentially, if you want good crops and you don't want to be out watering constantly, and with raspberries you'd be out 2 or 3 times a day watering, then they need to go in the ground. And if you get them in the ground and you've got good compost and a good moisture retention, then they're going to pretty much look after themselves. I haven't watered my raspberries in 3 or 4 years since I established them, and they do well every year. So, and that's because the ground is absorbing the water that's happening now, and it's just holding on to it, and those raspberries have sent their root systems down quite deep. So, Michael Lindsay, what would you put in a bed after garlic in June or July? Um, I'd probably put something like purple sprouting broccoli or something like that in it. Something that's then going to go through summer into winter, ready for the spring. Um, so something like that, or something really quick like radish. Turn it over to another salad bed or something like that for late salads. Or even turn it over to things like chicories and things like that. Something that you're going to want for the later crops. I'm topping with mushroom manure. Yeah, that's great, Ali. Again, just be mindful with mushroom composts and manures and things. They throw loads of lime in that. So just be mindful what you're growing in it. Do a test on it to see what the pH is like before you're putting anything like acidic conditions in it. If you're growing potatoes, you're going to find that it'll probably give them quite a bit of scab. So just bear that in mind, okay? So that's all of those questions. I'm just going to go through a few notes, check on anything that we haven't done. So the other thing that you can be looking at now, like I said, is all the DIY stuff. Let's just turn Ali's comment off. So the other thing we can be looking at now this time of year is all the DIY stuff. So we've got all the garden prepped now. We've got the beds filled and they're all ready to go. We've got them checked as far as the sort of nutrition levels and the pHs. So we've done our soil tests. Yeah, we're ready to go. And obviously we're now sowing in greenhouses or whatever the case we're doing. Once you've got that done, we now have time to sort of sit back a little bit and go, right, okay, what jobs do I want to do this year in the garden, and make a list of those. Okay, what can I fit in now within the weather and the timescales that I have, and do those jobs, like reskinning a polytunnel, rebuilding shed, changing the layout of the garden even. This is perfect time. Building in water systems if you're doing water collection like I have. This is the time of the year to get all of that crappy work done, because you're not going to be able to do it when all the plants are growing. So it's a perfect opportunity to go and get that done now. But, this is the case of it, guys. It's just a case of going out, looking at things, spend that time in the garden and go, do you know what? I don't like that there. I'm going to move it. Or, where I've been growing for the last few years in the ground, I want to now start going to raised beds. The knees are playing up again, the back's playing up. So I'm now starting to build and buy the raised beds, and eventually I'll turn it all over to raised beds. My first garden was all raised beds. But these raised beds are going to be high raised beds, so that I am going to bend over as I get older. I'm pushing 48, so I know that's still young, but when you've had, my job, you're on your knees and back all the time. I've already had operation on both of them, so it doesn't take long to for you to realize that you can't sustain that for any length of time. So let me have a little look in these comments, see what you guys have been putting as far as what you're doing in the gardens at the moment. Yeah, so Steve's just saying about nematodes twice a year. Yeah, like I said, I've always through the growing season done them every 6 weeks, but that's because I produce my own and I am going to worry about them. Um, Jay's posted the link for the book. Thank you, Jay. While I'm on the book subject, guys, just to let you know, so the second book, Your First Vegetable Garden, will hopefully be out in March. I'm just waiting on the layout just to be finalized. I've had back all of the files that pertain to the editing of the book and everything. That's all done now. They're just finishing the internal layout, and it'll be ready then to get off to the publishers and things like that for them to get those books sorted, and hopefully we won't have the same issues we had with Amazon this year. So I want to get that uploaded to Amazon much earlier than I did last time before I launched it. But at the moment we're looking at a March launch for this book, which will be perfect. And this book is all designed basically to take you through an entire year in the garden, as well as explaining how to grow most of the vegetables that you would grow in the garden. It's a big book, guys. This isn't. This is probably another 30 or 40,000 words on top of Composting Masterclass in size. So it's a real big book, and with that it will be a little bit more expensive because of the printing costs. But like I said, this will basically it's an in-depth work so that someone can literally pick that book up and go into a garden and turn it from a standing garden or patch of land, whatever it is, into producing food, how to harvest it, how to store it, everything, and get that garden ready for the next season. So that's exactly what this book is for, okay? Francis, thank you very much for your super chat. I really appreciate that, and thank you for supporting the channel. The super chats, guys, they really help with being able to pay for the softwares and things like that. So I do really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, so this book will be coming out with that, and I'm working. So obviously you guys know there's a third book that the publisher has given me the deadline of the 20th of March to finish, but that won't come out until 2024. So that'll be early 2024. But I'm also working on a journal, a gardening journal for you guys as well. And that journal will be set up how I want my journal to be, in not just this thing where you can just write notes and things like that, although we'll have those sections, but it'll be complete. They'll have all sorts of pages within it that will allow you to track everything, design the garden. It'll be able to do all sorts. So that journal will hopefully be coming out within the next few months as well. So there'll be lots of little bits and bobs coming around, smaller things as well. I've got an ebook that I finished writing a while back. I've just got to get that edited, and that'll be coming out as well. But that'll only be an ebook, that will, guys. So there's lots of stuff coming in the pipeline for you that will help you with your gardening journeys. So Pat has just put his question up. Let me just get back across to main thing there. I've got my potatoes a bit early. Do you think it's okay to store them in the dark in the garage for a few weeks before putting them to chit? No, Pat, don't do that. So basically what happens is a potato's put into long-term storage once they're harvested, which is a cold store. It'll be dark and cold, and that's how they store these potatoes, okay? Once they've come out of that cold storage, that potato wakes up. You can't put it back into storage. If you put it in the dark, it's going to chuck out these really long white shoots, and they'll be no good to you to use. Best off doing what I've done with mine. Mine are here. I've got some egg trays and I've placed them out, and they're chitting now. So because the tuber will chit for months, okay? And people worry about a tuber starting to shrivel up and things like that. It's already done its job. All the tuber is there for is a food source to get the chit to grow. Once that chit grows, it's done its job. It doesn't need it anymore. It can grow your potatoes from that point on. And in fact, some of the giant videos, the giant potato videos, I cut the chit out of the potato, just leaving a little small piece of potato on the end of it, and I've grown them chits, and then I produce potatoes like this out of them. So don't worry about them shriveling up a little bit. That's fine. It's not going to affect them at all. As long as you've got nice stumpy little chits, then those will still grow fine and they won't rot off on you, okay? So get them out chitting now. And they'll actually, they will last a lot longer as well, by being out cold, frost-free, and bright, and then you'll be fine with them. And they will last you months and months, way before, they'll be ready then, chitted well, in time for you to plant, okay? So, guys, I think that's pretty much it. We can talk about like installing new things and build, like we have with water systems and building, pergolas and support structures and things like that. Get all of this stuff done while you can. It'll just make your life much easier at the back end of the year when all you're going to be doing is either sowing, planting out, or watering. Yeah, and that's what it's all about, really. Anyway, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this live stream. I've enjoyed chatting to you once again, and hopefully we'll get a little bit better weather. Everything is rock hard at the moment. It's either raining or rock hard here, so a bit of sun would be nice. But we will be out in the garden very shortly filming. I hope you're enjoying all of the shorts and the live streams. They're coming out daily at the moment, the shorts and the live streams weekly, and we will soon get the normal videos in as well for you. So keep tuning in. The next video will be, or the next live stream, I've turned my phone off. Let me turn it on. Learned my lesson after last week, so I turned my phone off, so now I've had to switch it back on because it was pinging all the way through. So give me 1 second. I think we're probably going to be looking at, what day are we today? Yeah, so we're probably going to be looking at Saturday again, maybe. Let me just check. No, it'll be Sunday next week, guys. Okay, so again, I will put out a notification like I have done with all of these so that you're aware of what we're going to be doing. Haven't decided on the topic yet. If you want me to do a specific topic, put that in the comments in this video of topics you'd like us to discuss. Maybe we'll discuss that. And if it's a topic that I can get a guest on because they know a bit more than me, then maybe I'll do that as well. So if you want us to talk about something specific, put that in the comments of this video. Anyway, guys, hope you have a fantastic week. Like I said, get out there, get that garden prep done, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.